Imagine spending years sharpening your mind, learning, observing, understanding how the world truly works, only to find yourself constantly surrounded by people who refuse to think. You present logic, they respond with emotion. You present evidence, they respond with stubborn opinions. You try to explain reality, they argue with it. And slowly, something strange begins to happen inside you. Not anger, not even frustration, but exhaustion. Because one of the most painful realizations intelligent people face is this: the world is not filled with people who seek truth. It is filled with people who defend their illusions. And if you don't learn how to deal with this reality properly, your intelligence will become your greatest source of suffering. But the truly intelligent eventually discover a deeper strategy. They stop trying to fix everyone and start mastering how they respond. Because intelligence is not proven by how well you argue with fools. It is proven by how wisely you manage your energy around them. And there are 5 powerful principles that separate people who constantly suffer in these situations from those who remain calm, respected, and mentally free. One of the greatest traps intelligent people fall into is the quiet belief that truth automatically wins arguments. It feels logical. If something is true, if the evidence is clear, if the reasoning is sound, surely the other person will eventually understand. Surely facts will break through confusion. Surely logic will calm emotion. But human psychology tells a far more complicated story. Researchers who study belief systems have identified something known as the backfire effect. When individuals are confronted with information that challenges what they already believe, something unexpected happens inside the mind. Instead of reconsidering their position, they often tighten their grip on it. The mind does not interpret the new information as a correction. It interprets it as a threat. And when the mind feels threatened, it does not search for truth. It searches for protection. You can see this everywhere: in political debates, in comment sections, in family arguments at dinner tables. One person carefully presents facts, studies, statistics, historical examples. The other responds with emotion, sarcasm, or dismissal. The conversation slowly shifts away from reality and becomes something else entirely. It becomes a defensive identity. This is where many intelligent people unknowingly walk into a psychological trap. They believe they are participating in a rational discussion about ideas. But the other person is not defending ideas. They are defending who they believe themselves to be. And identity is one of the most fiercely protected things in the human psyche. When you challenge someone's deeply held belief, you are not simply presenting information. You are touching something personal, something tied to their sense of belonging, their worldview, their tribe. And the mind reacts to that challenge almost the same way it reacts to physical danger. It fights back. Think about a typical online argument. You present a well-researched point supported by evidence. The other person responds with a meme. You explain the reasoning behind your perspective. They respond with mockery or insults. Slowly, the tone becomes sharper, the patience thinner, the emotions louder. And before you even realize it, the discussion has completely stopped being about truth. It has become a competition of pride. At this stage, something strange happens inside the intelligent person. They feel an urge to prove themselves, to clarify the misunderstanding, to present even stronger evidence. They believe that if they just explain the point one more time, just a little more clearly, the other person will finally see the logic. But often the opposite occurs. The more you try to win the argument, the more resistance you encounter. History quietly shows us this pattern again and again. Many of the most brilliant minds faced ridicule in their time simply because their ideas challenged the dominant beliefs of society. Not because they were wrong, but because people rarely welcome information that destabilizes their mental comfort. The wise eventually recognize something that the intelligent often learn the hard way. Not every conversation is a search for truth. Many conversations are battles for psychological territory. They are about pride, ego, and emotional defense. And when you step into that arena, believing you are participating in a rational exchange of ideas, you unknowingly agree to fight a battle that cannot truly be won. Because you cannot force clarity into a mind that is protecting confusion, you cannot open a door for someone who is determined to keep it closed. This realization, while initially frustrating, eventually becomes incredibly liberating. The moment you truly understand this dynamic, a quiet shift happens in the way you approach conflict. The urgency to correct everyone begins to fade. The need to win every debate loses its grip on you. You begin to recognize something deeper. Your intelligence is not measured by how many arguments you win. It is measured by how wisely you choose the battles worth fighting. Arguing with someone who refuses to think does not prove your brilliance. It only proves your willingness to waste energy. It is like trying to teach complex mathematics to a wall. The problem is not the clarity of the explanation. The problem is that the wall was never built to understand. And when you realize this fully, something inside you becomes calmer. You stop chasing victory in every conversation. You stop trying to force awareness into unwilling minds. Instead, you observe, you listen, you recognize when a discussion is rooted in curiosity and when it is rooted in ego. And when you encounter the second type, you do something that requires far more strength than winning an argument. You walk away, not because you are incapable of defending your ideas, not because you lack the evidence or the reasoning, but because you understand that your energy is far too valuable to be spent inside psychological battles, where truth was never the objective in the first place. Intelligence is often admired for its sharpness, its ability to see patterns others miss, its capacity to analyze complex problems and uncover hidden truths. But what many people fail to understand is that intelligence is not simply a gift of knowledge. It is a function of energy. Deep thinking requires an enormous amount of mental clarity. Creativity demands space in the mind. Problem-solving requires focus that is undisturbed and sustained. Without that energy, even the most capable mind begins to dull. And yet, most intelligent people unknowingly place themselves in environments that slowly drain this very resource. Constant exposure to negativity, ignorance, and endless pointless debates acts like a quiet leak in the mind's fuel tank. You may not notice it at first. A conversation here, an argument there, a comment that irritates you, a discussion that spirals into nonsense. Each one seems small, but over time, these small moments accumulate. They chip away at your patience, your clarity, and your emotional balance. Psychologists describe a phenomenon called emotional contagion. It is the idea that emotions move between people almost like a virus spreading through a room. Human beings unconsciously absorb the emotional states of those around them. If you sit with someone who is deeply anxious, your body begins to mirror that tension. If you spend hours around someone who constantly complains, your perception of reality slowly begins to darken. And if you spend enough time arguing with irrational people, something far more subtle happens. Your mind begins to operate within their chaos. At first, you believe you are simply responding. You believe you are correcting false ideas or defending logic, but slowly the emotional atmosphere begins to shape your reactions. Your tone becomes sharper. Your patience becomes thinner. Your thinking becomes reactive rather than reflective. In other words, the very intelligence you were trying to defend begins to erode. This is why many of the most thoughtful individuals throughout history guarded their solitude with great intensity. It was not arrogance. It was not hatred of people. It was the quiet recognition that the mind needs protection in the same way a flame needs protection from the wind. A candle can illuminate an entire room in darkness, but if you expose it to constant gusts of air, the flame flickers wildly and eventually dies out. The human mind functions in a similar way. When surrounded by constant noise, endless conflict, and emotional turbulence, its ability to illuminate truth becomes unstable. Imagine a scientist attempting to conduct delicate research in a room where people continuously shout random opinions. No matter how brilliant the scientist may be, the environment would sabotage the work. The mind requires silence to explore complex ideas. It requires calm to connect patterns. It requires distance from chaos in order to see clearly. But modern life rarely encourages this kind of protection. People are constantly pulled into arguments, debates, comment sections, workplace tensions, social conflicts. Many feel an obligation to respond to everything they see or hear. They feel responsible for correcting every misunderstanding or challenging every flawed opinion. Yet this constant engagement quietly drains the mind's most valuable resource, energy. And the individuals who eventually master their intelligence learn something that changes the way they move through the world. They develop a habit that seems almost deceptively simple. Before entering a discussion, before responding to a provocation, before stepping into an argument, they ask themselves one quiet question: is this conversation worth my energy? It is a question that requires honesty. Not every disagreement deserves your attention. Not every comment deserves your response. Not every opinion deserves your emotional investment. Sometimes the most intelligent response is not to engage at all. This does not mean ignoring reality or refusing to stand for truth. It means recognizing that your mental clarity is a limited resource. It must be invested wisely. Just as a skilled strategist does not send soldiers into every battle, a wise mind does not enter every argument. There are conversations that sharpen you, that expand your understanding, that challenge your ideas in productive ways. Those are worth your attention. They stimulate growth. They deepen perspective. They build intellectual strength. But there are also conversations that do the opposite. They drag you into cycles of irritation, misunderstanding, and emotional exhaustion. They pull your focus away from meaningful pursuits and scatter your attention across trivial conflicts. And the most disciplined minds learn to recognize the difference. When they encounter discussions fueled by ego, hostility, or stubborn ignorance, they do something that often surprises others. They step away, not dramatically, not defensively, simply with calm awareness, because they understand something that many people spend years learning the hard way. Walking away from a pointless conflict is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of self-mastery. It means you have recognized the true value of your mind and refused to spend it where it will be wasted. In that moment, you are not avoiding the battle because you cannot win it. You are refusing it because you understand that your energy is meant for something far greater than endless arguments with those who have no desire to think. There is a quiet strength in silence that most people overlook. In a world where everyone feels the urge to respond instantly, to correct, to argue, to defend their opinions, silence often appears weak. It appears passive. It appears as if the person has nothing to say. But the truth is far more profound. Silence, when used with awareness, can become one of the most powerful forms of psychological control. When someone says something foolish, the instinctive reaction is almost automatic. You feel the urge to correct them. Your mind begins constructing counterarguments before they even finish speaking. You feel a responsibility to challenge what is wrong, to restore logic where you see confusion. And for an intelligent person, this urge is especially strong because clarity matters to them, truth matters to them. But over time, something interesting begins to reveal itself. Many of these interactions are not truly about truth at all. They are about attention. Human beings crave attention in ways they rarely admit. Sometimes a person will make exaggerated claims, provocative statements, or deliberately foolish remarks simply to trigger reactions from others. When someone responds with outrage, argument, or correction, the person receives exactly what they were unconsciously seeking: validation. Even negative attention can feel like confirmation that they matter. The argument becomes a stage, and both participants become performers in a conflict that feeds itself. This is where intelligent people often walk directly into the trap. They believe they are correcting misinformation or defending reason. But in reality, they are fueling the very behavior they wish to stop. Every reply becomes oxygen for the fire. Every counterargument extends the life of the conflict, and slowly, the discussion transforms into something less about ideas and more about emotional escalation. You can observe this dynamic everywhere, in heated online debates, in workplace disagreements, in family conflicts that repeat themselves year after year. One person says something provocative, the other reacts strongly. The first person responds again, escalating the tension. And suddenly what began as a simple statement becomes a long, exhausting confrontation. But something fascinating happens when one person chooses a different response. Silence, not silence filled with resentment or passive aggression, but silence rooted in calm awareness. Silence that refuses to feed the emotional storm. When one side stops responding emotionally, the dynamic changes instantly. The argument loses its rhythm. The tension loses its fuel. The person who was seeking attention often finds themselves speaking into empty space. Without resistance, the conflict has nothing to push against. Imagine a fire that is no longer given oxygen. At first it burns intensely, searching for fuel, but eventually it weakens. Eventually it fades. Silence can have the same effect. This is why strategic silence is not about suppressing truth. It is about choosing the right moment to speak and the right moment to remain still. Intelligence is not only measured by how clearly someone can express their ideas. It is also measured by their ability to control their impulses. Not every foolish comment deserves a response. Not every provocation deserves your time. And not every person deserves access to your attention. The wise eventually develop a deep sensitivity to timing. They learn that words have the greatest power when they are used sparingly. When you speak constantly, your voice becomes noise among noise. But when you speak selectively, your words begin to carry weight. People listen differently to someone who does not react to everything. Silence creates presence. It signals emotional stability. It demonstrates that your mind is not easily manipulated by the chaos around you. There is something deeply unsettling about encountering a person who refuses to be pulled into pointless arguments. When someone throws criticism, mockery, or foolish claims into the air and receives no reaction, they often become confused. They expected resistance. They expected a battle. They expected an emotional response that would validate their performance. But calm silence dismantles the performance entirely. In that moment, something important is revealed. Control has shifted. The person who remains calm holds the psychological advantage. Their mind is not trapped inside the emotional storm. Their focus remains steady. Their energy remains intact. This is why silence is not weakness. It is discipline. It requires strength to resist the impulse to react immediately. It requires awareness to recognize when a conversation is no longer meaningful. And it requires confidence to walk away from a moment where others might expect you to defend yourself. Sometimes the most powerful response to foolishness is not a clever comeback, not a perfectly crafted argument, not a long explanation filled with logic. It is the quiet decision to step out of the game entirely. And in that moment, something remarkable becomes visible. You demonstrate something far greater than intelligence. You demonstrate mastery over your own reactions. You show that your mind cannot be easily provoked, easily pulled into chaos, or easily manipulated by the emotional noise of others. Because true intelligence does not need to shout to prove itself. Sometimes it simply stands still, remains silent, and lets the storm exhaust itself. One of the most important realizations an intelligent person must eventually face is that not everyone who sounds foolish is truly foolish. At first, these two things appear identical. Someone says something that seems irrational, uninformed, or completely disconnected from reality, and the instinctive response is to label the person as incapable of understanding. But the human mind is far more complicated than that simple judgment. There is a critical difference that separates two very different kinds of people. One lacks knowledge. The other lacks willingness. Ignorance is simply the absence of information. It means a person has not yet encountered the right ideas, the right experiences, or the right explanations. Their worldview is limited not because they refuse to see, but because they have not yet been shown where to look. Stupidity, on the other hand, is something deeper and far more difficult to confront. It is the refusal to expand. It is the stubborn resistance to learning even when truth stands clearly in front of the mind. The difference may seem subtle, but it changes everything. A person who is ignorant can grow with remarkable speed once curiosity awakens inside them. History is full of individuals who began with very little knowledge, but transformed themselves through a simple but powerful trait: the willingness to ask questions. Curiosity has an almost magical quality. When someone truly wants to understand, every new piece of information becomes a tool for transformation. Their thinking expands, their assumptions evolve, and their understanding deepens with each conversation. But the second type of person behaves very differently. They are not limited by lack of information. They are limited by their attachment to their existing beliefs. When confronted with new ideas, they do not explore them. They defend against them. When evidence challenges their assumptions, they do not examine it carefully. They search for ways to dismiss it. The barrier is not the mind. The barrier is the ego. The ego fears being wrong because being wrong feels like a loss of identity. If someone has built their sense of self around a particular belief, admitting that belief might be flawed can feel like a personal collapse. So the mind constructs defenses. It rejects new perspectives not because they lack logic, but because they threaten the comfort of certainty. And this is where intelligent people often experience deep frustration. They encounter someone who appears to misunderstand something obvious, and they assume that patient explanation will solve the problem. They invest time, they present reasoning, they offer examples, analogies, and evidence. Sometimes this works beautifully. When the other person is curious, the conversation becomes energizing. Ideas flow back and forth. Questions open new doors. Both minds expand. The person who lacked knowledge begins to see things differently, and the one who shares the knowledge feels the satisfaction of helping another mind grow. This kind of exchange is deeply meaningful, but when the other person is trapped by ego rather than ignorance, the experience becomes exhausting. No matter how clearly the idea is explained, it is rejected. Every explanation is interrupted. Every example is dismissed. The conversation becomes a circular pattern where logic never finds a place to land. And slowly the intelligent person begins to feel drained. The problem is not that the idea is difficult to understand. The problem is that the listener has no desire to understand it. Imagine a mentor spending hours guiding a student who asks thoughtful questions, who reflects carefully, who genuinely wants to learn. Even when progress is slow, the effort feels worthwhile. There is movement. There is growth. There is the quiet satisfaction of watching another mind evolve. Now imagine the same mentor attempting to teach someone who mocks every explanation, interrupts constantly, and refuses to consider any idea that challenges their pride. The energy invested in that conversation dissolves into frustration. Nothing grows. The wise eventually recognize this distinction, and once they see it clearly, they begin to change how they invest their attention. They stop trying to teach everyone. They stop assuming that every misunderstanding is simply ignorance waiting to be corrected. Instead, they begin to look for a very specific signal in the people around them: curiosity. Curiosity reveals itself through small behaviors. Someone asks questions rather than immediately defending themselves. They pause to consider unfamiliar perspectives. They show interest rather than hostility when presented with new ideas. These are the minds worth investing in, because curiosity is the doorway through which transformation enters the human psyche. When that doorway is open, even the most complex wisdom can slowly find its way inside. But when curiosity is absent, even the clearest truth echoes into silence, and the truly intelligent eventually learn a quiet but powerful discipline. They invest their energy where curiosity lives. They share ideas with those who are ready to explore them. They guide those who are willing to grow, and they step away from those whose pride has built walls around their thinking, not with anger, not with arrogance, but with calm recognition, because they understand something that changes the way they interact with the world. Wisdom cannot be forced into a closed mind. Without curiosity, even the most profound insight becomes nothing more than sound passing through the air. Perhaps the most liberating realization an intelligent person eventually reaches is something that feels almost rebellious at first. You slowly understand that your purpose in life is not to fix everyone around you. It is not your responsibility to correct every mistaken belief, challenge every foolish opinion, or drag every unwilling mind toward understanding. Your deeper task is far more demanding and far more meaningful. Your task is to evolve yourself. This realization often comes after years of frustration. Intelligent people frequently carry a quiet burden because they see patterns, because they notice contradictions, because they understand consequences that others ignore. They feel an urge to explain what they see. They believe that if they can just articulate their thoughts clearly enough, the people around them will eventually recognize the truth. But the world rarely operates that way. There will always be people who misunderstand you. There will be people who dismiss thoughtful ideas as unnecessary complexity. Some will mock depth because depth makes them uncomfortable. Others will feel threatened by intelligence because it exposes the limitations of their own thinking. And if you allow every one of these reactions to pull your attention away from your path, you will spend your entire life trapped in arguments instead of growth. History quietly shows us a powerful pattern. Many of the individuals who reshaped the world were not constantly debating everyone around them. They were not trying to convince every skeptic, silence every critic, or defeat every opponent in conversation. They were working. They were building ideas, experimenting with possibilities, and refining their understanding of reality. While others argued about what was possible, they were exploring what was real. While critics spent their energy attacking unfamiliar ideas, these individuals spent their energy improving their craft. And slowly, something remarkable happened. Their work began to speak for them. Think about the pattern that repeats throughout human history. Innovators introduce ideas that initially sound strange or unrealistic. Philosophers propose ways of thinking that challenge established beliefs. Scientists uncover truths that contradict the assumptions of their time. At first, many people respond with doubt, mockery, or outright rejection. But the ones who truly transform the world do not spend decades fighting every critic. They spend those decades sharpening their understanding. They refine their methods. They test their ideas. They deepen their knowledge. They learn from failure. They grow stronger through curiosity and persistence. And eventually the results become undeniable. What once seemed foolish begins to look visionary. What once sounded strange begins to look inevitable. The same voices that once dismissed the work now begin to admire it. There is something almost ironic about this transformation. The people who were once loudest in their skepticism often become the ones who later praise the results. Not because their nature changed suddenly, but because reality eventually became too clear to ignore. This is the quiet power of focusing on your own evolution. When you stop trying to correct every foolish voice around you, you suddenly recover something incredibly valuable, something that most people waste without even realizing it: time. Time that was once consumed by arguments becomes available for reflection and learning. Energy that was once drained by pointless debates becomes available for creativity and growth. Focus that was once scattered across countless distractions becomes concentrated on something meaningful. And these three resources, time, energy, and focus, are the true currency of transformation. Every great achievement in human history was built from them. Every breakthrough, every discovery, every work of art, every revolutionary idea required someone to invest these resources with discipline and patience. But this investment requires a decision. You must decide that your life will not be shaped by the opinions of those who do not understand your path. You must decide that your attention will not be controlled by the noise of people who are more interested in criticism than curiosity. because the truth is simple but often difficult to accept. You cannot control whether others understand you. You cannot control whether others respect your thinking. You cannot control whether others choose growth or stagnation. But you can control what you do with your own mind. And when you focus that mind on continuous improvement, something powerful begins to unfold. Your understanding deepens, your skills sharpen, your perspective expands. The ideas you once struggled to express begin to manifest in tangible results, and those results carry a different kind of authority. Arguments rely on persuasion. Results rely on reality. When someone builds something meaningful, when their ideas create visible impact, when their work improves lives or reveals truth, the noise of criticism begins to fade into the background. Reality speaks with a clarity that debate rarely achieves. This is why true intelligence does not need to shout in order to be recognized. It does not demand attention through endless arguments. It grows quietly, day by day, thought by thought, effort by effort, and as it grows, the results begin to form a language of their own. A language that even the most skeptical observer eventually begins to understand. Because when intelligence is guided by patience, discipline, and relentless curiosity, it produces something far more powerful than winning arguments. It produces undeniable evidence. And when that evidence becomes visible to the world, something fascinating happens. The same people who once questioned your thinking begin to look at what you have built with a very different perspective. Not because you forced them to understand, but because the truth you invested your life in has finally become impossible to ignore.